Hi, my name's Tim from HB3. I'm a physiotherapist and university lecturer, as well as an endurance coach. And in partnership with Wild Ginger Running, I'm here to give you the lowdown on running insoles. Should you get some? And if so, what type? And for what purpose? To be transparent, all these insoles were provided for free by the respective manufacturers. However, that has in no way influenced this review. You may have tried insoles in the past, perhaps consider them for additional comfort or maybe due to an injury that you've had, but you're not sure which to go for. Hopefully during this review I can help you understand the differences out there to help you make an informed decision. However, before we get into the review, bear with me while I offer you a brief introduction to biomechanics, as it's important to understand this in order to make the right decision for you. So firstly, what are these insoles? These are aftermarket insoles which replace the existing insole of your shoe. They sit between the sole of your shoe and your foot, plus your socks. The idea is they influence how load is transmitted through the foot and the shoe. By altering the forces that apply to the foot, they can change the position and motion of the foot or alter the forces on specific structures of the foot and whole lower limb, in fact. But what is the difference between an insole such as these and an orthotic? You may have heard of people getting custom-made orthotics or custom insoles, many of them costing hundreds of pounds. Now, an orthotic is a medical device created by a trained professional, usually a podiatrist, to treat a specific medical condition or injury. Now, these really should be short-term use while recovering from said injury, but are occasionally long-term devices for very specific reasons. But there have been many studies showing that even for medical conditions, an off-the-shelf insole is just as effective as a custom-made insole or orthotic. So unless you have a very specific medical need, you shouldn't be reaching for those expensive custom insoles as your first choice. Now, while I am trained in making custom insoles and orthotics, I'm fortunate to work with a number of extremely good podiatrists. So if any of my clients do need a more specialist custom orthotic, I can refer out. But that is rare because most of the time an off-the-shelf insole such as these is sufficient. But before we talk about these insoles, let's understand some of the demands of the foot during loading, i.e. when landing on the ground during running. Firstly, the foot needs to be compliant. It needs to be able to absorb the energy and adapt to the surface it's landing on. But it also needs to be stiff to allow those forces to be applied to the ground. Newton's third law of motion: whenever two objects interact, they exert equal and opposite forces on each other, otherwise referenced as every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So for optimal running economy, we want a stiff foot that acts like a spring. A little more on that later. Finally, for the foot, there is the sensory feedback to provide the brain with information to assist with balance and movement. It needs to be able to feel as much of the ground or a surface as possible. Which leads us back to these off-the-shelf insoles and what they're trying to do. The design of these insoles are attempting to change the external forces applied to the foot in order to reduce the stress experienced by these internal structures, such as the bones, tendons, ligaments. And this is done through the shape of the insole and then the materials used. So we have a little bit of a paradox here. Insoles can support the foot and change and reduce the forces on the body, but this negatively influences the running economy and performance. But pain or overload will, of course, itself influence performance. Some studies have shown that reducing the forces on the foot might be advantageous for long endurance running, but for short distance racing and sprinting, we may find it's actually a negative outcome in terms of performance. So you need to be clear about what you're wanting these insoles to do for you. So back to our selection of insoles here. What are each trying to do? Absorbing shock and supporting the structures of the foot. But what about those insoles that come with your shoes anyway? Aren't they any good? So let me show you a little test using a golf ball and my kitchen work surface. So one of the things we're looking for is shock absorbance or impact absorption. So we look at the golf ball just bouncing on the kitchen worktop and then compare that with our standard insoles that come with your running shoes straight out the shop. These ones being an older pair of Adidas ones and these being a pretty brand new pair of Hockers. So you can see we get a little bit of shock absorbance here. So now let's compare with the options we have for review and how to get them fitted for your shoes. So when you get your insole, you may notice that actually the insole is different to the one that comes in your shoe. It might be a little bit bigger, might be a little bit wider. So we're just comparing a few examples here of the insoles from some Adidas and Hoka shoes. So what you're then going to need to do is get your scissors out and trim it to fit. So firstly we have the Noene 2mm insole, which is purely about shock absorption and dispersion of those forces. They claim that their vitro-absorbent elastomer will absorb and disperse up to 92% of negative vibrations caused by the foot hitting the ground. Now we can debate what they mean by negative, but let's see how well it absorbs that impact shock. Noene also produce a 4mm insole, which although isn't actually advertised anymore, there is one shop which still stocks them, which is Wally Warm and Dry near Clitheroe in the northwest of the UK, who still order and buy direct from the factory. These were not provided to me for the review, but I purchased these myself because I do personally use these 4mm insoles as part of a leg length correction and impact absorption for my broken and short right leg. Let me show you how effective the 4mm is. So if you really need maximal shock absorption for whatever reason, these are the best out there. But remember, you are trading that running efficiency for that shock absorption. So you need to be clear about whether this is right for you. Now let's compare this to the Sidas Impact reducer, which has dual foam. So more impact dissipation at the heel and then forefoot propulsion. These insoles are 3mm thick, so halfway between those two Noene options. The different foams in this insole therefore offer more than simple shock absorption of the Noene, with more energy return at the forefoot. And running in these, the heel did feel similar to the Noene, but a little less of that dead feeling at the forefoot that you can get with the Noene. So I like them, and I do use these in my shoes. Another brand supplied for this review were the Ultimate Performance Gel insoles, which, as the name suggests, have gel inserts at the heel and the forefoot, as well as a slight structured arch. These are designed for both running and walking, and whilst very pleasant to walk in, they did not give that same degree of impact reduction or support when running. And this really comes down to the materials used and the forces the insole needs to deal with. Gel is perfectly fine for the lower levels of force, which walking produces. But when running, our feet are taking 3 to 5 times our body weight through each foot strike. Gel just doesn't have those same properties as the other insoles on test here. So if you want something for walking around at work or hiking, perhaps these might fit the bill. But for running, I would advise looking at one of the others on test here. Next up is the Sidas Activ Max Protect. These are thin cushioned insoles, similar to their impact reducer in that they have a gel pad at the heel to absorb impact on top of the overall dampening foam, and then propulsive foam under the forefoot. This one also has a small arch support to provide that extra stability to the midfoot. It's only a very subtle arch support, but it's enough to give you that little bit of additional support and sort of filling in of that arch. I used these through a 100-kilometre trail race, the Race to the Castle, where I came third. And while I had the usual aches and pains afterwards, my feet didn't feel battered or bruised whatsoever. So I like these. These were good. For From here, let me show you the Enertor insoles, which are again focused on shock absorption. Their foam dissipates the impact forces to reduce the stress on the leg. The difference here is that these shock absorbing insoles have a little more structure to them, with a very slight arch and then even a metatarsal button. Now initially my feet took a little bit of a time to adapt to the shape of these insoles, but very quickly these became extremely comfortable, and I actually use them regularly in some of my less cushioned running shoes. I've already bought a pair of my own, so that maybe tells you something. Something else worth highlighting is that Enertor asks you to post them back, your old insoles, once they've worn out, and they will recycle them, turning your old insoles into insulation or rubber matting for children's playgrounds. Or if they're still wearable when you post them back, they pass them on to a homeless charity called Forgotten Feet. So a bit of kudos to Enertor for doing this, something that hopefully we'll see more companies following suit with. Now, back to Sidas again for their Run Sense insoles. These come in different shapes depending on the shape of your foot in terms of the medial arch, so whether you have a low arch, medium or high arch. Similar to the Max Protect, they have shock absorption at the heel and a propulsive foam under the forefoot. But this model also has a larger, more structured arch support, so your whole foot is a little more supported. These obviously give more support to those plantar structures of your foot, which can reduce the stress on things like your plantar fascia. I previously used custom orthotics with a lot of arch support and then moved away to more minimalist shoes and strengthened my feet up. Adding that arch support back in was a little odd for my feet, but again I quickly adapted and found these very comfortable, just maybe less shock absorbing than the others already mentioned. So generally I only use these in shoes which already had a good degree of cushioning, maybe such as my Hockers. Finally, I'll talk about the Superfeet Run insoles. Now, these are not designed to the same extent as others in terms of shock absorption, but they have a lot more shape to the foot. They have this carbon fibre which supports the heel and the midfoot and really springs back to give you that extra propulsion into your stride. A bit like the carbon plates we're seeing in running shoes. They do have a small gel at the heel and a little bit of impact reducing foam at the forefoot, but I just didn't feel it was the same shock absorption as the other ones already mentioned. However, it does give a greater degree of support. So if support is what you need, these might be a good option. So, as you can see, there is a range of performance in terms of their ability to absorb force and shock, which might be a good thing for you. But we know that if we reduce that peak shock at the foot, then the shockwave is transmitted up the chain. So the knee or the hip might have to deal with that peak shockwave. So reducing the shock isn't always a good thing. What about the shape in terms of filling in those arches of your foot, supporting that plantar surface structure? That's the bottom of the foot. The insoles with more structure will have the greatest influence in terms of maybe motion control or support of the foot. But again, is that right for you? So now we've considered the insoles, but what about the shoes they're going into? Our running shoes are getting more and more technical in terms of the materials used and the functions they're offering. I have a lot of shoes, much to my wife's despair, but each has a different purpose. As such, I use different insoles with different shoes. From a personal perspective, as already mentioned, I use the Noene insoles on a daily basis and have done actually for decades. Firstly, as a leg length correction for that short leg following multiple fractures, and secondly, as a way of reducing those impact forces because my bones are full of metal and they don't absorb shock too well anymore. And then I've really liked using the Sidas Run Sense or the Max Protect Activ in shoes, which already have a good degree of cushioning. either the Hoka style ones, or again I've used Enertor in shoes with less cushioning, where I want maybe that little bit of extra support or that metatarsal button to help spread those toes. Now personally I didn't get on with the Superfeet ones, but that isn't to say they aren't as good, they're just not good for me. And to be fair to Superfeet, I do recommend their brand to my clients on a regular basis for those who do need more structural support. And again, what I said about the Ultimate Performance insoles, I found them very comfortable for just walking around in, but they just didn't give me that same level of impact reduction and support when I was actually running. So they wouldn't be one that I would personally be using in my running shoes. So as this is a review, I'm supposed to finish this by giving you my recommendation of which is the best insole. But it is a hard call for the reasons hopefully I've outlined. So if you were thinking of trying adding an insole to maybe reduce the impact forces and not dealing with broken bones like me, I'd probably be going for the Enertor, as it also gives that little bit of support to the arch and an important metatarsal button to help spread those toes. If you want a little bit more structure and arch support, then actually the Sidas Run Sense would be a good shout. Your best option is always to go and visit your local running shop and actually try these insoles on and check which feel more comfortable to you. But if you're hoping insoles will solve an injury alone, I'm afraid you are mistaken. They can certainly be part of the solution, but you also need to speak to a qualified physio or sports therapist who can advise you on the appropriate exercises to resolve your problem. I hope you found this useful. Please subscribe to both this channel, Wild Ginger Running, and my own, Tim Pigott. And follow us on all the usual social media channels at Wild Ginger Running and at Tim Pigott HP3. All the links are below. Thank you for watching. See you next time.